I think what I like about decay, it is almost like an external kind of factor influence on something that exists, which transforms it or glitches it, and if it's beautiful, then kind of what it adds to the existing work or picture or wall. Like, especially if it's organic decay, it actually has a life of its own, because typically it might be some kind of fungus or bacterium, whatever, or it's because of a natural process that follows certain rules. I like also the idea that it is something out of my control. That is a very important part in my work, that I love to get rid of control or let go of control and see what other processes can do to something that I put there. So my father had already been working with computers in his profession, and so even I think before I was 10 years old, I came to his office and was allowed to play some kind of early Space Invaders, and he had plotters there. So this whole world of computers I found already very fascinating. He also loved to bring home little gadgets. So one of the gadgets was a tiny little programmable pocket calculator. I love this thing and try to teach myself little stupid programming things. And yeah, realize that programming is really what I enjoy. I was also kind of interested in photography. I like the experimental part of photography, where you could try to create photography without a camera. I guess kind of these two approaches, picture making without kind of using your hands, right? Like not painting, was what I realized I loved. I guess the first time AI came, like the idea of AI came to me when I came across this book by Marvin Minsky. I think it's called The Society of Mind, in which he laid out how potentially AI could work. And it had a lot of very pretty illustrations, but the idea that you could have this autonomous machine which can take decisions or create something, I found extremely fascinating. But we are talking early 1990s, and that's technology was way out of reach, except if you maybe had a computer lab. So I had to work with my little possibilities, and so I stayed for quite some time longer with a generative algorithmic approach. I think it took me quite some time to call myself an artist. I think I always felt that what I was doing was art, but then you did not get the kind of response or the encouragement, because at that time, of course, there were already the early pioneers around and people were working with it, but in my immediate surrounding, kind of that idea that you could use a computer to create art. So in a way, for me, it was always experimentation and just what I had to do. Calling yourself an artist is when you change the rules, right? As long as you don't do that, everything is forgiven. You can do whatever you want, because it's just a hobby. It's not serious. Once you claim, no, this is art, it's serious, you also invite people to say, no, I don't think so. What I have been doing, the practice, I would say, even then I didn't call it a practice, right? Because that's art speak. My approaches haven't changed. It's only maybe now I'm having more of more consideration, or I'd rather know why I'm doing it, and before it was curiosity and just instinct. SketchMaker was trying to solve like that first issue I tried to solve in making myself redundant, or going through the process of thinking like, which parts in my process can I replace with machines, right? I was hoping to write an algorithm that can create algorithms, right? So, and that's what SketchMaker tried to do. But we are in a world before LLMs where you could just ask a machine, give me something that does it, and then it would output you a whole code. No, you had to do that in a different way. What SketchMaker did was then take a random selection from potential kind of modules, put them like one after the other, and each of them would process the input of the previous one. So that would generate an algorithm, and in the end, some image came out. But then it had the ability to mutate the process. Starting from an initial algorithm, or generative code, it could then produce, instead of just varying the single algorithm, it would vary the algorithms. But then, of course, you have the usual problem that you have with any generative art. Now you have this machine that produces you infinite amounts of outputs. Somebody has to look at them and decide, oh, there's nothing there. Actually, you just draw me a blank canvas. What's that? That's where I started to think, okay, how can the machine solve that part? I tried to make now the machine see things that I could see, but there were, again, no feasible neural networks at that time. So I started it from first principles, and I had this book I found on a flea market, which was called The Famous Artist Painting Course. It actually really broke down the whole process of how to create a painting into little steps. And so I could go through this book and check with every step if this is something I can measure. So what I did, I wrote more and more of these detectors and put their values all together in one big vector, right? Each of them returned a few numbers, some more, some less, and you just put them in a spreadsheet. And that is then the unique signature of that image. So all I had to do then is kind of calculate signatures for images I like, and that was my approach. Or does it look like art or doesn't it look like art? So it's really very simple. And then I have a number for things I like and things I hate. My basic idea was, okay, so once it has calculated this, it can measure, am I closer to images that I like or am I closer to images that I hate? So if I'm closer to the ones I hate, then you have to mutate some more and then measure again. So it is kind of like a gradient descent or an evolutionary, like a typical evolutionary approach. Neural abstractions was the first time I could use a generative neural network, right? So that was the first time where you did not feed in an image, but you fed in a vector. In this case, it was kind of a category vector, and that would output a very abstract or maybe less abstract image. The way this worked is in that it was actually not truly trained itself, but it was kind of almost attached to classifier models. Because before we had generative models, what we already had were classifiers, right? These typical GoogleNet or AlexNet, which were already so much better in saying, here's a dog, here's a house, but they were image in, information out. And what this thing is, what it took something like GoogleNet and attached itself to it and was then able to show how it looks like if this model recognizes a dog, right? So, but what you could do also, you could train your own classifiers and then visualize what they see. For the purpose of the neural abstractions, I ran it on several models I had already trained myself. So I had trained a big model on record covers. These classified models, let's say something that recognizes skulls on heavy metal covers, they have to get an idea how a skull looks like, and others, like how a person looks like. And that was fascinating to see also then what are the factors that enable it to distinguish these things and what are the features it looks for. And that's kind of then what this model is showing, but the difference is actually this model was able to create something much more concrete. Of course, I was interested in the spaces between the well-known, the charted areas, and that's what the latent space allowed you to do, right? You could start from the birds and then move towards the skull or so and see, okay, what's happening on the route from here to here. And that's kind of what we see here. It's kind of like the abstract, like it doesn't kind of dissolve entirely, right? There is already kind of a underlying knowledge about fundamental things that all images have in common. Chicken or beef is, let's say, one sideway out of a larger exploration that I've been following quite some time then. Like coming from the abstracts, of course, I was interested in then getting more realism. And one of the things that, let's say, the available models and everything that was out there was lacking was humans. And so that's where I started trying to figure out how can I create proper humans, starting from faces, but then getting more adventurous into bodies, because actually, interestingly, bodies are more difficult than faces. And of course, you need training data for that. So I was training it on bodies, and the input was stick figures, because what you already had were these models that were able to kind of detect poses, right? So you feed in a photo and it would give you back arms, head, feet, everything, like whatever, is it 16 lines? And so by collecting a huge amount of training data, over time that model allowed me to become like a puppeteer. So you could pose the figure and then it would try to give you some kind of output. And of course the outputs were super interesting because the models were not so good, and a lot of them, like pretty much all of them, had this painterly, uncanny aesthetic that I really liked. So what I did, I took this model that I already had, but instead of giving it true stick figures, I had it create entirely random figures, right? So because that's the thing, once it understands a sketch, these models will always give you an output, right? So they will try their hardest to make sense of whatever you give it. And if you give it a figure with 20 arms or something that's totally jumbled around, has 3 heads or no head, it will still give you an output. I always found the kind of threshold between, let's say, normal, uncanny, obscene, pornographic, kind of where, like, is that like an arbitrarily drawn line, or is this something where kind of like, yeah, where there is this weird zone in between where you can't say, am I looking at, is this a chicken? Is this a human? Is this, what is this? And is this something I can share on social media or not, right? Is this really truly obscene, or is this tasteful art? So, and I like to navigate this weird space in between. First, it was about solving the whole problem of image generation. Then, I guess the next thing was solving the problem of curation, right? Selection. So saying like, okay, now what I have here, but what is it? Maybe the question is like, okay, what do I have here now? And is there meaning in some of them, or is there like, which one are closer to what I want? But now I think I've gotten to the point where that I feel that has been solved. I'm now trying to build the machine that does everything that I've been doing for the past years, the whole meta thinking about it. So what I'm doing these days is really, coordinating agents that are doing all this and trying to think about it in interesting ways, find their own ways of missing tools or abusing tools to find meaning.